Hey everyone, Blizzard has posted some upcoming tuning for the next weekly reset, which is May the 5th or May the 6th, depending on which region you're playing in. And there are some warrior buffs, which is very exciting. It's saying here that these tuning changes are aimed at improving warrior performance overall, as well as compensating for damage lost due to the Deep Wounds Deep Wounds bug fix last week. And for those who don't know about this thing, it's here. Deep Wounds applied by Execute no longer deal double the intended damage. So believe it or not, we were actually dealing more damage than intended. Anyway, they also fixed slams from Fervor Battle, which critically strike will now correctly trigger Mortal Wounds. So for those who didn't know about that bug either, is this talent here, Mortal Wounds. It makes it so that when Mortal Strike and Slam crit, it inflicts Deep Wounds. And Fervor Battle also autocasts Slam or Heroic Strike if your Cleave or Whirlwind hits 3 or more targets, right? So Slams or Heroic Strikes cast via Fervor Battle, even if they crit, didn't trigger Mortal Wounds. But now they do, I'm glad they fixed that, because we were missing out on some of our priority single target damage while we were AoEing due to that bug. Anyway, let's look at the tuning here. So they are buffing Arms' Execute by 20%, Overpower 20%, Slayer Strike 40%, Reap the Storm 30%. That's quite significant. Execute definitely will feel better to press. I am still quite annoyed that they aren't buffing our Rage Gen somehow, or especially in Execute, because in Execute is where you'll really feel Rage Starved as Arms. But let's move on. I'll talk more about this in a bit. So Fury, all damage increased by 5%, as well as Execute 20%, Raging Blow 20%, which is kind of whatever. Raging Blow is still bad for Fury, but it'll be 20% less bad. Slayer Strike also increased 40%, Reap the Storm 30%, and Ground Current damage for Mountain Thane increased by 50%. So that's the AoE damage portion of Lightning Strikes for Mountain Thane. I think it's when you Thunderblast. Anyway, so how much do these buffs help us? So Archie's already done the math, and he says Fury Slayer gains 10%, Arms gains 8% on single target, and in AoE, Fury Slayer gains 10% and Arms 6%. And Thane actually gains 6% for both single target and AoE. And because the buffs are for Execute and Overpower and Slayer specific things, Colossus actually doesn't really gain anything. Execute, you can't really afford pressing as Colossus, and Overpower just isn't that big of a deal. So what do the changes mean then? I think it'll definitely help us in raid. It'll help us do more single target. Is it enough? That I'm not so sure about. And which spec is better in raid? That I'm also not so sure about. Depends on what you need to do. I do think that you'll probably want to play Slayer, Fury, or Arms on a boss like Lura, for example, where Execute is a big deal. I think Arms probably is the better spec on that boss, just because it deals more damage in the more important phases. But anyway, let's talk about M+, which is a lot more interesting, I think. So when it comes to single target in the M+ builds, Thane will do about 110k, Slayer, Fury will also do about 110k on single target with max gear. That's without the 298 pieces, by the way. And the AoE, Thane should be ahead on that as well. I'm still curious if Slayer Fury can do better than Thane sometimes, but I doubt it in M+. But it's nice to have the option at least, and it's probably not too far behind. I'm still going to test both and see what it's like and see what I think is better. I think because the numbers are so close, or there are like ups and downs for each spec, it's really hard to say which one is better. So definitely a case of testing a lot and maybe even changing each dungeon. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, the single target for Slayer Arms versus Colossus Arms is actually quite interesting here. With max gear, again, no 298 pieces. Colossus Arms with a standard build is doing 81k simmed, and Slayer Arms is doing a whopping 100k. So that's a big difference on single target. But the AoE is also quite significant, right? Colossus Arms does have the best AoE out of all of the specs that we have. So when I simmed Slayer Arms versus Colossus Arms in AoE, it was 1.5 targets. It was something like 670k on 10 targets at 1.5 minutes for Colossus, and the same sim for Slayer was 550k. So that's again a very big difference. Maybe it just depends on what you need and what you prioritize. And also, a lot of the single target weaknesses are fixed for Colossus if you're able to pull trash into boss as well. So it's just really hard to say which one is actually better in practice. One interesting thing that I should talk about here as well is for Slayer arms, it's because they didn't buff Mortal Strike, they buffed Execute. We found that it's slightly better to drop some of the Mortal Strike buffing things, such as Battle Lord here. So we drop Battle Lord, we drop Bloodborne, so that we can take Massacre and Critical Thinking instead, which means that you'll be executing a lot more. You'll have Rage for Execute as well. It's still not going to feel endless. You're still going to feel slightly rage-starved, but nowhere near as much with this Critical Thinking talent here. I think Execute, as you can see, on single target, is doing a lot of damage here. This sounds fun. Definitely something I want to try first, or very early on, when next week's tuning comes through. So, to summarize then, after the tuning coming next week, I think we'll be looking something like this, where Slayer Fury is very slightly better than Thane Fury, and Slayer Arms is not far behind, and then Colossus Arms is really far behind. And then for AoE, Colossus Arms reigns supreme, and then it's Thane Fury, then it's Slayer Fury, then it's Slayer Arms. These are sim numbers, right? So this isn't how it's going to be exactly in practice. I want to try it all in practice before I make a real decision on what I think is better. And like I say, it might be different for each dungeon, or depending on comp even. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.